Before we can start building apps, there are a few basic principles we'll need to understand and some preparation needed. In this session, we'll look at Facebook application basics and how we can set up a first Facebook app. Before we can build a Facebook app, of course, we'll need to understand some basics about designing Facebook apps. There are two types of apps we can design for Facebook. One is a Canvas app, which is basically shown in the full width of the Facebook site. These are the more traditional type of apps that we're used to seeing, such as Farmville and many other applications that we've all seen many times. There are also tab apps, and tab apps run on a Facebook page. They run in the context of the normal Facebook profile type display, which means they have less space in which they can be shown. The space available here is basically equivalent to the space available for your newsfeed, for example. And tab apps on Facebook pages will often use light gating, which is basically a way of providing different content to users who have liked the page, as opposed to those who have not yet liked the page. Let's just take a look at some of the design parameters for these two types of applications. Canvas apps, as I said before, have the full width available of the canvas in Facebook. This equates to 760 pixels. The height is not really limited, although obviously you won't want to have an app that's too high, otherwise it won't be very visually pleasing for the user. If you do have an app that is higher than the usual Facebook page, you may notice you get scroll bars on the iframe in which the app is running. We'll look at how to deal with this a little bit later on as well. Page tab apps, as said, run in the equivalent width of the newsfeed, which is 520 pixels wide. So here we have to be careful that we design assets to fit appropriately. The same considerations regarding height and scroll bars apply here as well. Now, before we can develop Facebook applications, we'll first need to set up the developer app, which is in itself an app supplied by Facebook, which allows us to create and edit our applications. Once we've set up the developer app, we'll be able to create applications. We'll then be able to go on to write our application code. So before we start to talk about authentication and basic Graph API calls, let's take a look at how the developer app allows us to create applications. The developer app is our dashboard, if you like. It allows us to see the basic settings for our application. It allows us to change those settings, to assign different roles, to look at statistics for our application, and it allows us to change any of the settings of our application or to create new applications, or even, of course, to delete an application which we no longer require. There is a possibility to see all of your applications in a handy grid format. There is also the possibility to search through your applications should you have a large number of applications for which you've been responsible and need to find one in a hurry. This is something you'll probably be needing later when you've created lots of Facebook applications. Once you've created an application, or when you go to look at one of your existing applications, the first thing you'll see is basic information about that application. This includes the app ID and an application secret, the name and description, and the icon and logo, where you can actually change and assign a new icon and logo. You may also change the category in which your application is placed, and change the native default language choice of your application. Moving on to the Roles tab, and here you will see the various sections: administrators, developers, testers, and insights users. You yourself will be listed as an administrator because you created the application. You may add further administrators, and administrators have all of the rights to change any of the settings within the application, including deleting the application. You may add further developers should you have other developers in your team. Developers can run, edit and test an app. Testers have access to test the application in sandbox mode. When you create and first develop an application, you have the option in the settings to select sandbox mode, which basically means that nobody outside the team of administrators, developers and testers will be able to see anything posted to a wall by that application. This is clearly important if you have a large application that you're developing over time and you wish to keep its development quiet until it's ready for release. Insights users can be added to allow people who are otherwise not able to see settings for the application to look at statistics, the insight statistics for the application. And Insights is basically Facebook's own statistical system which will sit underneath your application and log such things as the amount of users are using your application, monthly active users. You may also track which parts of your application they use, etc., etc. This is certainly something that will deliver interesting statistical information over time, and you may want to add a client, for example, to the Insights users so that the client can see how their campaign is running without giving them access to the rest of the application settings. Once you've installed the developer app, you'll find that it sits in the left-hand menu on your Facebook profile, along with other applications, making it easily available and easy to find for when you need to change application settings. Okay, that's covered the developer app. We'll take a look at how we can set up the app and create an initial application in a few moments. First, let's look at another very important topic, and that is authentication. Authentication is required to enable users to allow your application to access the data required by the application and to ensure that they are happy that they're only granting access to certain pieces of data. Authentication is carried out in Facebook using OAuth 2, and for those of you who'd like more details about exactly how OAuth 2 is implemented within Facebook, I suggest taking a look at the article under the link here on sociallipstick.com, which describes the use of OAuth 2 authentication within Facebook applications. For our purposes, however, we can look at the authentication as having 3 steps. The user is authenticated, which means their login is confirmed, they are logged into Facebook. The application is authorized, i.e. permissions are granted to access the data required by the application. And finally, the application is authenticated, which means an access token has been issued and returned to the application. How does this look? Well, we've all seen this Facebook login dialog when we've tried to access an application and haven't been logged into Facebook. We're prompted for an email and password to log into Facebook. And if we look at the URL at the bottom of the slide here, we'll see basically how that would be carried out with a simple HTTPS URL call to the OAuth processes for Facebook login. A request permission will be popped up when the app asks for various permissions. All apps on Facebook will ask for basic permission, which is to access basic information for the user. This is effectively the same as the information we saw in the Graph API Explorer when we first issued a call without granting further permissions. This step then leads to app authentication. If we require further permissions within our application to send email or to post onto the newsfeed, for example, then we'll need to request those further permissions. This is carried out by passing through a scope parameter to the OAuth login dialog and listing the permissions we require. We'll look at how the PHP and JavaScript SDKs implement this, but on a basic URL level, it would look like the URL at the bottom of the screen here. Once the OAuth process has confirmed that the user's logged in to Facebook and the user has accepted the permissions necessary, then the app is finally authenticated and control is passed to the application together with an access token, which is then required to make certain Graph API calls to retrieve some of the data that we require in the application. At this point, we have a valid session, we have a valid connection to the user's Facebook session. We now have an access token. We can retrieve any of the data we require, provided we have the permissions for it, and we can use that data within our application. So we've talked a little bit about the basics. We've gone through the process of authorization and authentication at a basic level. Let's take a look now at the Facebook developer app and see how we can set up our first application. Okay, so the first thing we need to do in Facebook is to set up the developer application. I'm using a temporary profile which I've set up purely for this course, for the simple reason that I already have the developer app installed with quite a few applications on my account, and this way it'll be much easier to show you how to set it up. So the first thing we'll need to do to set up the developer account is to go to developers.facebook.com. And if we click on Apps, we'll see a request for permission. What we're doing now is we're in the process of installing the developer app, and we need to grant it some basic permissions to retrieve our profile information, name, etc. We'll say Allow, and there it is. We now have the Facebook developer app added to our profile. To create an app, you'll need to verify your Facebook account. This is one of the safeguards that Facebook have introduced over the years to reduce the risk of spam applications. As my trainer account isn't verified, I'm now back in my own Facebook account and logged into the developer app to show you how to create not one, but two apps which we'll then use in the further lessons of this course. We'll create two applications simply because we'll be creating both JavaScript and PHP SDK versions of the various samples in the lessons as we go through the course. So let's start off with creating the first app. Let's create the PHP one, and we'll call it FBCourse_PHP. Agree to the terms and click Continue. We now have one of these lovely captchas to enter. So hope I got that right. And there we see the FBCourse_PHP app has been created, and we see immediately the basic information for the course. Okay, we'll leave it at that for now. We'll go back to the apps. There it is at the top of the list with its information shown by default. And we'll create the JavaScript version. Same process again. A somewhat easier captcha this time. And we have our app set up for the JavaScript samples as well. Go back to the apps and we'll see the PHP and the JavaScript examples are now set up ready for us to carry on with the further lessons of the course.